The stars stretched endlessly, pinpricks of light against the backdrop of the void, each one a potential battleground, a future filled with unknown threats. Commander Alec Novak stood at the observation deck of the ISV Resolution, eyes fixed on the galaxy beyond. The weight of the decision pressing on him was nearly unbearable. Across the galaxy, tensions were mounting, but humanity, now a respected force among the galactic races, had chosen restraint over aggression. The voice of Admiral Thalen cut through Novak's thoughts, his words sharp, dripping with derision. So, Commander, this is how humanity intends to face the Zirax threat? By hiding behind walls of caution? Novak turned slowly, his face unreadable but the tension in his eyes unmistakable. Thalen, leader of the Drosk Alliance, was everything Novak had come to expect from the warrior race. Broad, imposing, his features were scarred from countless battles, a symbol of his species' valor in war. To the Drosk, war was life. They respected strength and feared nothing, except perhaps the absence of conflict. "We're not hiding," Novak replied, his voice calm but firm. "We're assessing. There's a difference." Thalen barked a laugh, his armored fist striking the nearby console. "Assessing? While the Zirax gather fleets, prepare to strike at any moment, you assess? You have the ships, the technology. Why do you hesitate?" Novak held his gaze, refusing to be intimidated. "Because war isn't our first solution." "Then it's your last," Thalen retorted, stepping closer. "And last solutions leave you weak." Novak turned back to the stars, the silence stretching between them. The Drosk couldn't understand. To them, the avoidance of war was weakness. For humanity, it was wisdom, born from the lessons of Earth's blood-soaked history. Centuries ago, humans had nearly destroyed themselves with conflict, and though they had emerged stronger, they had learned something vital: war consumed everything. It left only ruins, and in the silence after the battle, the cost was always greater than the victory. "We have no desire for more scars, Admiral," Novak said quietly. "Our wars, the ones we fought among ourselves, taught us that much." Thalen sneered. "A history of cowardice. Or survival," Novak countered, his voice growing more resolute. "We've learned that war destroys not just your enemies, but your people, your resources, your future. It's a price we're not eager to pay." Thalen crossed his arms, his eyes narrowing. "You think the Zirax care about your history? They'll strike, and when they do, they won't wait for your noble ideals to save you." Novak sighed, understanding the alien's frustration, but unwilling to budge. "We know how to fight when we have to, Admiral. But that doesn't mean we should rush into battle every time someone threatens us." Thalen's voice lowered, the mockery gone, replaced by something more dangerous. "And what if you're wrong, Novak? What if your hesitation costs you your worlds, your people? The Drosk don't hesitate. We act. And that's why we survive." Novak knew the stakes. The Zirax were aggressive, unpredictable. They expanded through conquest, enslaving or annihilating any who stood in their way. The Drosk, eager for glory, sought human assistance in a preemptive strike, a strike that could ignite a full-scale galactic war. Thalen wanted blood, and to him, humanity's reluctance was incomprehensible, even insulting. But Novak wasn't willing to be goaded. He'd seen too much of war's aftermath, understood too deeply what it took from those who fought. The price was never just the lives lost on the battlefield, it was the innocence, the hope, the future stolen from the living. "We're not the same," Novak said, stepping forward now, his voice steady. "You fight for honor, for conquest. We fight for survival. When we go to war, it's because there's no other choice. Not because we want to." Thalen's eyes narrowed, his towering figure casting a long shadow across the room. "And if your avoidance of war leads to your extinction, Commander?" Novak didn't flinch. "Then at least we'll know we did everything we could to avoid that fate. We won't throw lives away to prove we're strong. Strength isn't in how many battles you win, Admiral. It's in knowing when not to fight." The silence between them thickened, the tension palpable. Thalon stared at Novak, measuring him, calculating. To the Drosk, this human philosophy was foreign, even weak. But Novak knew that strength wasn't just in the weapons you wielded, it was in the choices you made. Finally, Thalon turned, his heavy footsteps echoing as he moved away. "You're a fool, Novak. But I suppose only time will prove that." As the doors closed behind him, Novak let out a breath, his gaze once again turning to the stars. The galaxy was vast, filled with threats, with races that saw war as the only solution. But humanity had learned a different path. One that valued life over conquest, peace over glory. But even as he stood firm in his beliefs, Novak couldn't shake the unease settling in his gut. The Ziracs were coming, and despite humanity's best efforts to avoid conflict, war might be inevitable. And when it came, he wondered, not for the first time, if the price of their restraint would be more than they could afford. Novak stood before the council, his voice steady as he addressed the assembled alien leaders. They sat in judgment, each representing a race that had known nothing but war for millennia. It was clear they couldn't grasp the human perspective, couldn't understand why a species as capable as humanity would hesitate to engage in battle. But Novak had to try. "We've been here before," Novak began, his tone calm, almost conversational. "On our home planet, Earth, we fought wars that spanned continents, that claimed millions of lives. There was a time when it seemed as if every generation was marked by conflict, always the same cycle of violence, destruction, and loss. And it nearly destroyed us." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The aliens watched him, some with curiosity, others with open disdain. They couldn't understand how a species could view war as anything other than an inevitable and necessary part of life. World War I, World War II, nuclear standoffs, global conflicts, Novak continued. "We learned that no matter how justified the cause seemed, the cost was always higher than anyone predicted. Lives lost, families torn apart, entire cities reduced to rubble. And for what? Lines on a map? Resources that were used up as soon as they were taken? We learned the hard way that there's rarely a winner in war. Just survivors." Admiral Thalon, sitting at the far end of the table, shook his head, clearly unimpressed. "Survivors are the winners, Commander. That's the point. You fight to survive, to outlast your enemies." "That's what we used to think, too," Novak replied. "Until we realized that what survives after war isn't victory. It's devastation. It's rebuilding the same cities over and over again. It's generations scarred by the conflict, economies collapsing under the weight of constant battle. We've learned that sometimes, surviving a war means losing more than we ever intended." The council remained silent, though Novak could feel the tension building. They couldn't accept that war, something so ingrained in their cultures, could be a mistake, could be avoided. For races like the Drosk, war wasn't just a strategy, it was tradition, a way of proving strength and dominance. In human history, Novak continued, our greatest victories didn't come from the wars we won. They came from the wars we prevented, the conflicts we resolved before they could escalate. We evolved past the point where every challenge had to be met with violence. And we realized that diplomacy, negotiation, cooperation, these are the real tools of survival. He could see their skepticism, the thinly veiled contempt in their eyes. These aliens, born and bred in systems that celebrated war, saw his words as weakness. But Novak pressed on, refusing to back down. For you, war is a path to glory. A chance to prove yourselves, to strengthen your species. But for us, it's the last resort. We've seen the cost of war firsthand. Not just in soldiers' lives, but in the innocents caught in the crossfire. The children, the elderly, the civilians who bear the brunt of the destruction. Their lives are shattered, their homes turned to ashes, and for what? A victory that leaves nothing but broken people and ruined worlds in its wake? Thalon leaned forward, his voice a low growl. That's the price of power, Novak. It's always been that way. Weak civilizations fall, strong ones rise. Your peaceful ideals won't save you when the Ziracs fleets arrive. Novak met his gaze, unfazed. And what will war bring you, Admiral? More destruction, more death? How many of your people have already died in the name of this endless conflict? How many more will die before you realize that the cycle never ends? The other council members shifted uneasily. Some had fought alongside humanity in past skirmishes and knew the strength the humans possessed. They knew that if humanity wanted to, they could wage war with the best of them. But Novak wasn't here to prove humanity's strength in battle. He was here to prove their wisdom. You see, Admiral, war might bring you power, but it doesn't bring you peace, Novak continued. It doesn't bring stability. It only ensures that the next generation will be forced to fight the same battles, face the same threats. We've come to understand that true power doesn't come from how many ships you have, or how many planets you conquer. It comes from knowing when not to fight. There was a murmur from one of the other council members, a species Novak didn't recognize. They spoke softly, as if questioning their own beliefs. Perhaps, for the first time, the idea that war wasn't the only answer was beginning to take root. Thalon, however, was unmoved. You speak of survival as though it can be achieved without conflict. But the Zirax don't care about your philosophies, Commander. They don't care about your peace. They will come, and they will destroy you if you don't fight back. And we will fight if we must, Novak replied. But we won't do it recklessly. We won't throw lives away in a battle that can be avoided. That's the difference between us and them. We choose when to fight, and we choose carefully. Thalon scoffed, but Novak pressed on. The Zirax aren't our only threat. War itself is a threat. It destabilizes economies, it tears apart alliances, it weakens entire civilizations. And in the aftermath, there's always another threat waiting in the shadows, ready to strike at a weakened opponent. Novak stepped forward, his voice growing stronger, more resolute. We've learned that wars don't end conflict. They just create new ones. That's why we avoid war when we can. Because we know that the true victory is not in how many enemies we destroy, but in how many wars we prevent. The council was silent. Even Thalon, for all his bluster, couldn't ignore the weight of Novak's words. He had laid out humanity's philosophy, their hard-won understanding of the cost of war. And while many of the aliens still didn't agree, Novak had planted the seed of doubt, the idea that maybe, just maybe, there was another way. We're not afraid to fight, Novak concluded. But we've learned that strength isn't just in the battles you win. It's in the battles you choose not to fight. It's in knowing when peace is the better path. And that's why we avoid war. Not because we can't fight. But because we know there's always a better way. The council sat in uneasy silence. Novak had said his piece. Now, it was up to them to decide whether they could understand what humanity had learned through blood, loss, and centuries of conflict. The news came swiftly, piercing the quiet diplomacy like a dagger. A human colony, deep on the outskirts of known space, had been attacked. It wasn't the Zirax, as everyone expected. No, this was something else, something far more unsettling. The Drosk Alliance, despite their boasts of honor and strength, had struck covertly, attempting to draw humanity into the war they so desperately craved. Commander Alec Novak stood at the helm, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The colony had been defenseless, a community of scientists and civilians focused on exploration rather than conflict. They weren't prepared for an assault, and now hundreds of human lives had been lost. The Drosk had overstepped, believing that humanity's restraint made them easy targets. But Novak knew better. He had hoped to avoid direct conflict, but this was a line crossed. Novak's hands tightened into fists as he absorbed the reports. The council would convene soon, and he knew the calls for retaliation would be loud. They'd be justified, too. How could he continue to preach peace in the face of such blatant aggression? How could he stand before his people and tell them to wait when their brothers and sisters had been slaughtered in cold blood? The room buzzed with tension as his officers gathered, faces grim. They were looking to him for guidance, for a decision. But Novak's mind was a storm of conflicting thoughts. He had always believed in peace, in restraint, but this wasn't theory anymore. These were human lives, innocent lives, that had been snuffed out. The ideals he'd stood by now felt like a luxury he couldn't afford. Lieutenant Commander Harper broke the silence. "We can't let this stand, sir. They attacked us, civilians. If we don't respond, what's to stop them from doing it again?" Novak met her gaze. "I know. But rushing into war because of a single strike. It's exactly what they want. The Drosk are trying to provoke us. If we react without thinking, we'll be playing right into their hands." "Sir, with respect," Harper said, voice taut, "we have to send a message. If we don't act, we'll seem weak. The Council's going to demand action." Novak's stomach twisted. He knew she was right. Humanity's restraint was being interpreted as weakness, not just by the Drosk, but by other galactic powers as well. If they didn't respond to this attack, they risked emboldening others. Yet Novak wasn't ready to throw everything they'd built into the flames of war. Not yet. The tension thickened as an intelligence officer entered, a file in hand. "Commander, you'll want to see this." Novak gestured for him to proceed, and the officer quickly brought up the data on the display. The room went quiet as they saw the images. The attack on the colony had left a brutal scar, but there was something else. Something that hadn't been expected. "We've been scanning the region where the attack occurred," the officer said, "and we picked up anomalies." Novak frowned. "Anomalies?" "Sir, these energy signatures, whatever they are, they don't match anything we've seen from the Drosk or the Zirax. In fact, they don't match any known species." A ripple of unease spread through the room. Novak studied the readings, his mind racing. If it wasn't the Drosk or the Zirax, then who? The officer hesitated, then continued, "There's more. We've detected similar signatures coming from the edge of the void. The void, the vast, uncharted space beyond the galaxy. It had always been a place of mystery, filled with unanswered questions. Few dared venture there, and fewer still returned. But these signatures, they were from something alive. Something out there was watching, and they had been unnoticed for who knew how long." Novak's blood ran cold as he realized the implications. The colony attack might not have been as straightforward as they thought. The Drosk could be part of the equation, but this new player, these Voidwalkers, as the data hinted, were a far more dangerous unknown. "The void," Novak muttered, almost to himself. "We've been so focused on fighting among ourselves, we've ignored what might be out there." Harper's brow furrowed. "Are you saying the Drosk might not be behind the attack?" "We can't be sure," Novak replied, "but if these Voidwalkers have been observing us, they could be testing our response. Or worse, trying to ignite a larger conflict." The room fell into uneasy silence. A new enemy. One they knew nothing about, lurking in the uncharted darkness. The implications were staggering. The Drosk had provoked them, yes, but if this attack had been orchestrated by a third party, humanity might be facing a threat unlike anything they'd encountered before. Novak straightened, the weight of responsibility heavier than ever. "We can't let the Drosk push us into a war without understanding the bigger picture. If the Voidwalkers are involved, we need to be careful." An officer spoke up from the back. "But Commander, the Council is meeting soon. They'll want immediate retaliation against the Drosk. How do we explain this?" Novak sighed. "We'll have to tell them the truth. This is bigger than just us and the Drosk. If the Voidwalkers are out there, we need to focus on the real threat." As if on cue, a communication alert flashed on the console. It was the Galactic Council. Novak knew the moment of decision had arrived. He could already hear the voices of the war-hungry council members, clamoring for blood, for revenge. But now, with the potential of an even greater threat looming from the void, Novak couldn't afford to make a hasty move. In the council chamber, the alien leaders gathered, their faces stern and expectant. Admiral Fallon, predictably, was among the loudest, demanding immediate military action. The Drosk will not tolerate this attack on humanity, he thundered, his eyes glinting with the promise of war. We must strike back at once. Show the galaxy that humanity is not weak. Novak stood tall, facing the assembled leaders. He took a deep breath before speaking, carefully weighing each word. We're all angry. I understand that. The attack on our colony was a tragedy, and we will respond. But we need to be sure we're responding to the right threat. A murmur spread through the chamber, and Thalon scoffed. The right threat? It's clear as day who's responsible. Is it? Novak countered. Because our intelligence has picked up something disturbing, something that suggests there's more at play here than just the Drosk or the Zirax. There are forces out there we haven't considered. The Void Walkers. The room fell silent at the mention of the mysterious entities. Novak pressed on. We've detected energy signatures from beyond the galaxy, from the Void. If the Void Walkers are involved, this isn't just about revenge. This is about survival. The council members exchanged uneasy glances. The threat of the Void had always been a distant, abstract concept, something to be feared but never encountered. Now, it was real. And Novak knew that if they weren't careful, the war they were so eager to start might be the spark that led to their downfall. We need to focus on the larger threat, Novak said firmly. The Drosk may have provoked us, but if the Void Walkers are watching, waiting, we have to be united against them. Fighting amongst ourselves will only weaken us. Thalon's eyes narrowed, but even he could see the logic. Reluctantly, he fell silent. Novak could feel the tension, the hunger for battle simmering beneath the surface. But for now, he had bought humanity some time. The mission into the Void was unlike anything humanity had undertaken before. Commander Novak hadn't wanted it to come to this, sending a reconnaissance team into the unknown, directly to where they believed the Void Walkers resided. It was a dangerous gamble, but with the new threat looming and little information about these ancient beings, they needed answers. If there was any hope of avoiding another war, it lay in understanding who or what the Void Walkers were. The crew on board the scout ship, hardened by years of exploring distant stars, knew they were moving into uncharted territory, literally and figuratively. They had seen strange things before, but nothing could prepare them for the moment they made first contact. The energy readings they detected were staggering, far beyond anything they'd encountered. Soon, the mysterious ships of the Void Walkers appeared, emerging from the dark like phantoms, massive, sleek, and eerily silent. At first, there was only silence, the vastness of space filled with the oppressive presence of something watching. Then came the communication, a cold, emotionless voice echoing in the minds of the human crew. The Void Walkers didn't speak in the conventional sense, their language bypassing technology and going straight to thought. What they said was clear and chilling. Your time is over. The Void Walkers, as Novak had feared, saw the galaxy species as chaotic, destructive, and primitive. Their long isolation in the void had given them a detached view of the galaxy. To them, the civilizations squabbling over borders and resources were nothing more than pests, infestations that had disrupted the natural order. The Void Walkers were beings of absolute control, seeing themselves as the custodians of a universal balance. In their eyes, the galaxy's current state of constant warfare and conflict was intolerable. It had to be wiped clean. Novak received the message from the reconnaissance team with a grim sense of inevitability. The reports confirmed his worst fears. The Void Walkers weren't just a threat, they were an existential one. Their plan wasn't to conquer, but to exterminate. Every species, every civilization, every star system that had engaged in the chaotic dance of war and politics was marked for destruction. The Void Walkers saw their mission as necessary, a form of universal cleansing. They see us all as irredeemable, Novak explained to his officers. Not just humanity, but the Drosk, the Zirax, everyone. In their eyes, the galaxy's been tainted, and we're the source of the infection. It was a chilling realization. The Void Walkers didn't differentiate between aggressor and pacifist. To them, the very act of existing in such a turbulent galaxy was a crime that warranted extinction. Humanity's long-standing philosophy of avoiding war, of pursuing diplomacy, meant nothing to these beings. To the Void Walkers, they were all guilty by association. Novak's first instinct was to try diplomacy, even knowing the odds were slim. He couldn't let go of the belief that words could still save lives, that there was a chance, however small, to prevent full-scale destruction. But this wasn't like dealing with the Drosk or the Zirax, species that at least operated within a framework of negotiation, however warlike their nature might be. The Void Walkers operated on a level of cold logic, beyond emotion, beyond compromise. Still, Novak had to try. He sent a message, a plea, really, directly to the Void Walkers. It was a call for dialogue, an offer of peace. He spoke not just for humanity, but for the galaxy as a whole, painting a picture of potential change. He admitted the flaws of the warring species, the mistakes made, but he emphasized the capacity for growth, for transformation. Humanity had once been on the brink of self-destruction, but they had pulled back from the edge. The galaxy could do the same. For a long, tense moment, there was no response. Novak waited, knowing that everything hung in the balance. The crew around him watched in silence, their fate resting on whether these ancient beings could be reasoned with. And then, finally, the Void Walkers answered. Their reply was simple, and it sent a shiver down Novak's spine. Your words are irrelevant. The time for peace has passed. The Void Walkers saw no future for the galaxy as it was. To them, the only path forward was through destruction. They had observed long enough, and now they would act, not as conquerors but as executioners. The extermination of all galactic life wasn't a matter of if, it was a matter of when. Novak clenched his fists, his heart heavy with the failure. He had known it might come to this, but it still felt like a blow. Diplomacy had failed, and now humanity, and the galaxy, stood at the brink of an unimaginable conflict. War was no longer a choice. It was a necessity, a fight for survival against an enemy that couldn't be reasoned with. Novak called his officers into a briefing. The mood was somber, the air thick with the weight of their predicament. We've tried diplomacy, Novak said, his voice grim but resolute. It's time to face the reality that the Void Walkers won't stop. They're coming for us. For all of us. And if we don't stand together, we're finished. Lieutenant Commander Harper, who had always been more pragmatic about the need for war, nodded. We have to act now, sir. If the Void Walkers are mobilizing, we don't have time to waste. We'll need to convince the rest of the Council to unite, even the Drosk and the Zirax. If we don't, we're fighting a losing battle. Novak knew she was right. Humanity couldn't face the Void Walkers alone. The entire galaxy had to put aside their differences, their petty wars, and focus on the real threat. It was a monumental task, but there was no other option. The irony wasn't lost on Novak. After spending his life advocating for the avoidance of war, he was now preparing to lead his people, and perhaps the entire galaxy, into the greatest conflict they had ever faced. It wasn't a decision made lightly, but there was no room for hesitation anymore. The Void Walkers had left them with no choice. The time for avoidance is over, Novak said, his voice steady. We prepare for war. But we do it on our terms. We fight not because we want to, but because we must. And if we survive this, we'll show the galaxy that there is another way. But first, we survive. The room was silent, but the determination in the faces around him was clear. They understood the stakes. The Void Walkers had forced their hand, and now it was up to them to rise to the challenge. War had come to the galaxy, not because humanity had sought it, but because they had no other choice. The battle against the Void Walkers had begun. Humanity, alongside its unlikely allies, the same species that once mocked their reluctance for war, now stood united. The irony wasn't lost on Commander Novak. After all the years spent preaching peace, of trying to lead by example and avoiding unnecessary conflict, humanity had now become the galaxy's spearhead against an enemy that gave them no other choice. The void itself seemed to shift as the Voidwalker fleet emerged from the darkness, their ships vast and ominous, gliding silently like specters. The sheer size of the enemy's armada was overwhelming. But it wasn't fear that filled Novak's heart, it was resolve. He had made peace with the decision to fight, knowing that it wasn't war he had sought, but survival. War was now a necessity, thrust upon them by an enemy that would stop at nothing short of extermination. Human forces led the charge, their technology and tactics unmatched by any in the galaxy. Years of avoiding conflict hadn't dulled their ability to wage war. In fact, it had sharpened it, their strategic minds in knowing precisely when to strike and how to make every move count. But this wasn't just about brute force. Humanity brought something else to the table, wisdom. Novak's fleet worked in perfect synchronization with the Drosk, the Zirax, and other galactic forces, blending their strengths, turning their differences into assets rather than liabilities. In that moment, humanity wasn't just fighting for itself, it was leading a collective stand for survival. Throughout the battle, Novak stood at the heart of the command center, his mind focused on every aspect of the war. The weight of the galaxy seemed to press down on him, but he bore it with the calm resolve of someone who had accepted the inevitable. He had always hoped to avoid war, but the truth was clearer now than ever. There were moments when conflict was unavoidable, and sometimes, it was the only path to safeguard the future. The Voidwalkers were relentless, their ships moving with eerie precision, seemingly impervious to the chaos of battle. They struck with devastating efficiency, their aim not to conquer, but to erase. The galaxy's forces were tested in ways they had never been before. Entire star systems were reduced to debris, and many of Novak's closest allies fell in the fight. For every victory, the cost was heavy, but the combined strength of the galaxy's forces began to turn the tide. It wasn't enough to simply win. Novak understood that even in victory, the galaxy would be forever changed. War, as always, left scars that would not heal quickly. Civilizations that had once fought over resources or territory now faced an existential question: was peace ever truly achievable, or was conflict an inescapable part of existence? The battle raged on, and amidst the chaos, Novak found moments of clarity. He realized that humanity's greatest strength was not in avoiding conflict, but in knowing when to engage and how to fight with a sense of purpose and restraint. It wasn't about mindless destruction, it was about ensuring survival with minimal loss, balancing aggression with compassion. He had always believed that war should be the last resort, and in this moment, it was. But now he understood that when war did come, humanity's role was not to lead with brutality but with wisdom. In a galaxy full of races who thrived on war, humans had shown something different. They had fought only when absolutely necessary, and even then, they fought not to conquer, but to protect. This, Novak realized, was humanity's true strength. The final push against the Voidwalkers was a grueling one. As the enemy's numbers dwindled, it became clear that this would be a Pyrrhic victory. Even as the last of the Voidwalkers' ships were destroyed, the price was staggering. Entire fleets had been lost. The galactic map had been redrawn, not by borders, but by the ruins of civilizations that had once stood proudly. Novak's own ship had taken heavy damage, and the lives lost weighed heavily on him. There was no cheering in the aftermath, only a grim silence that followed the end of every great battle. The galaxy had won, but it was a hollow victory. The war was over, but the scars it left would take generations to heal. Novak stood on the bridge of his ship, gazing out into the void that had birthed this threat. He couldn't help but wonder if this was truly the end, or if the void still held more secrets, more dangers waiting to emerge. The galaxy had united for now, but how long would that unity last? Would the old rivalries and wars resume once the immediate threat was gone? These questions lingered, haunting him. As the surviving fleets regrouped, Novak called for a moment of silence, a tribute to the countless lives lost. He looked to his crew and saw the same weariness reflected in their eyes. They had survived, but it had come at a great cost. And yet, there was a sense of pride too. Humanity had proven itself, not just as a race capable of great war, but as a force for balance in a chaotic galaxy. They had led when leadership was needed most, and in doing so, had earned the respect of allies and enemies alike. The Voidwalkers were gone, their threat extinguished, but Novak knew the void itself would never truly be empty. The galaxy was vast, and there were still uncharted territories, still mysteries beyond the known. There would always be new challenges, new threats lurking in the shadows. Humanity, however, had learned something vital, that strength didn't lie in avoiding war, nor in seeking it. True strength lay in knowing when to fight and when to hold back. The battle was over, but the galaxy would never be the same. Humanity had emerged from the conflict scarred but stronger, having proven that they could lead with both power and wisdom. The final message from Commander Novak, sent to the Galactic Council, summed up the truth he had come to accept. War is never the answer. But sometimes, it's the only way to protect what we value most. We didn't seek this conflict, but we will bear its consequences. And when the time comes, we'll fight again, not for glory, but for survival. Because in the end, survival is the one thing we all have in common. The void stretched on, dark and endless, but for now, the galaxy was at peace. What lay beyond the stars would remain a mystery for another day.